Hey, welcome to Plant Yourself. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson. Two quick announcements before we get to today's show. If you're interested in becoming a health coach, I'm offering another run due to popular demand for people who can't make 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights, Eastern Time. So we're doing another run of the program, which will meet, the practicums will meet at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, Eastern Time, U.S., which means if you're in Europe or Africa, that might be good for you. Also, if you're in the U.S. and evenings aren't good and you have free time in the mornings, either 7 a.m. Pacific time or 10 to 11:30 Eastern, then you can participate. If you want to find out more about becoming a wicked effective health coach, you can go to wellstartcoach.com. Second thing is, if you're not aware of it, Josh Lajani and I have a book that is free on Amazon Kindle. It's called Sick to Fit. And if you just go to Amazon and search for Sick to Fit, you'll be able to download it for free and read it on any Kindle-enabled device, even a phone, smartphone, tablet, computer, whatever. All right, let's get to today's episode. This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of plantyourself.com, the Big Change Program, and WellStart Health. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live a wise and wonderful life. Today's guest, Gregory Walton, is kind of one of my academic heroes. You know, he's not that well known in the outside world, but his work has informed and been informed by some of the giants of psychology today. People like Carol Dweck, the author of Mindset, who came up with the distinction between growth and fixed mindsets, and has influenced Kelly McGonigal in her work, The Upside of Stress. Whenever I was researching new techniques and interventions to help people change habits, Gregory Walton's name kept coming up. And one of his most compelling innovations is something that he calls wise interventions. These are brief, targeted experiences that can permanently change mindsets and create a cascading series of positive life events. For example, a 1-hour wise intervention for freshman students of color at a major university reduced the GPA achievement gap by 50% for the next 3 years. So 1 hour, and the effects lasted for 3 years, and they were significant effects. So naturally, I wanted to learn all this methodology in helping people change their own personal bad habits around health. And so Gregory Walton was kind enough to give me 22 minutes out of his busy day. And so this is going to be one of the briefer episodes, but fascinating nonetheless. And he also turned me on to the work of Greg Sparkman, with whom he's collaborated and who will be appearing in a future podcast. Before we get there, just a quick reminder that the Big Change Program / WellStart Health next cohort is going to begin middle of May. If you're interested, you can go to bigchangeprogram.com and sign up for the test drive, and you'll understand what we're going to be up to. And also, WellStart Health is going to begin a coach training program. If you're interested in becoming a wellness coach around plant-based ideas, give us a ring. You can just email me, howard@wellstarthealth.com. Okay, enough of that. Let's get to it. Without further ado, Greg Walton, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk to you about your work on what you call wise interventions, wise psychological interventions. It's some of the most interesting and exciting stuff. And actually, for me, who's been sort of a coach and a producer of interventions, it's kind of a bummer because, you know, I like the things that are like dramatic and I get to look like a hero and be amazing. And you write that the hallmark of these wise interventions is that they're ordinary, brief, and precise. Could you first tell us what a wise intervention is?
Yeah, we use the word wise in a very specific way. It doesn't mean good or effective. It really means psychologically wise to the psychological experience of a person in a setting, particularly wise to the meanings that person's inferring, how they're thinking about themselves or how they're thinking about other people or how they're thinking about a social situation that they're in, and how in some ways we can start to think about those things in ways that hurt our outcomes, how we can change those interpretations and those meanings to help people lead more fulfilling lives and to flourish.
Great. So what's the basis of the WISE intervention? Is it the work that Carol Dweck sort of pioneered on mindset, or does it come from other places as well?
It really comes from the whole field of social psychology. Social psychology as a field began directly with an interest in social problems. It began in the mid-20th century, thinking about, in many ways, the problems of the mid-20th century and intergroup relationships. How did the Holocaust happen? How do people work together in groups? How can you reduce intergroup prejudice? And social psychology began with an interest in those problems. It began to understand those problems over the course of the 60s and 70s and the 80s, increasingly in laboratory settings where researchers would take problems, they'd bring them into the laboratory, they try to bottle very specific processes that people were experiencing in the context of those problems. And now, with the understandings that we've developed through that work, we're able to go out into field settings and to address those processes in ways that can produce a sustained change in people's lives.
Gotcha. So some of these WISE interventions would almost seem magical in terms of the inputs and the outputs. So, what's your favorite sort of elevator speech WISE intervention that you can share with us?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that my colleagues and I have done has been on what's called the social belonging intervention. And this is work that was really inspired by basic laboratory research in social psychology by Claude Steele and Josh Aronson and Steve Spencer and others on what's called stereotype threat. And the idea was in that work that people, when people walk into settings where they have to perform well, if there's a negative stereotype about their group in that environment, that can be really threatening and disruptive. People can worry, will somebody, if I do badly, will people think that people like me can't do well? And so what we did in taking this into field settings was to ask the question, well, when people go into new school environments, when they're entering a new school, when they're going to a new job, often people wonder, is this a place where I'll belong? Is this a place where people will value and respect me? But if you're walking into a setting where your group is underrepresented and negatively stereotyped, then you can experience that pressure even more so. It's a more pervasive, persistent feeling. Will people really value and respect somebody like me? Can people like me belong here? So what that process can do then is it can make people it can create ambiguity about what negative events mean. If something bad happens to a person, if you feel isolated, if you're excluded from a social event at school, and you're wondering whether people like you can belong there, it's easy to wonder, is this a place where maybe this means that people like me don't belong in general? And that worry can make you disengage. So the belonging intervention is an hour-long experience that people go through in its original form, where people learn about other students' experiences in a transition, like a transition to college. And what they learn is that it's normal to worry at first about whether you belong, and it gets better with time. And what that's designed to do is to convey to people that when they're going through a challenge, when they feel left behind by friends, or when they're criticized by a professor, or when they feel lonely or homesick, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't belong in general or that people like them don't belong. Now, that intervention was delivered in an hour at the end of students' first year of college in a selective university. And for African American students who are underrepresented and negatively stereotyped in higher education, it raised their grades over the next 3 years of college, reducing the achievement gap with white students by 50%. Now, that can look like magic from the perspective of inputs and outputs, as you say. You do something for an hour, how could that possibly last, have an effect on a meaningful outcome like GPA over 3 years? And yet, for a student who's sitting there in college wondering whether they can belong in that environment, whether people like them can belong, learning from older students' stories that it's normal to worry at first about whether you belong, that many students do, that it gets better with time, can be really transformational.
So I've been, trying to figure out how to apply this to to my own field in health. And one of the things that I notice is that everyone has a story. Everyone who comes to me has a story of, I tried and I gave up. And so they've got this sense of themselves as, I'm a quitter. I can do it for a while, but I can't maintain it. And so I was wondering if there are sort of wise interventions around reinterpreting a slip up. Like, everyone's human, everyone makes mistakes. Is that something you think also can be amenable to that sort of shift?
Yeah, many wise interventions are about change and the possibility of change. And one of the things that's really important about them is that they don't claim that everything's going to be easy or that change is not difficult. Instead, what people learn often is just that change is possible, that it's always possible, and that can be empowering for people. So, for example, in work by Carol Dweck and Eran Halpern on the Middle East peace process, Israelis and Palestinians who learn that groups can change, that it's possible for groups in general to change, become more likely to make concessions to the other side and have more positive attitudes towards the other side. In work by David Yeager and others on adolescents' experiences of bullying in school, learning that people can change, that individuals can change, that bullies need not always be bullies and victims need not always be victims, that can help kids react less to experiences of bullying, to aggress back less, to experience less stress, to miss less school, and to ultimately do better in school. And growth mindset interventions, which convey that intelligence is not a fixed quality, but something that can grow and develop. Those interventions help kids stay engaged when school's hard. From the perspective of a growth mindset, if you fail a math test, it doesn't mean you're dumb at math. It just means that you haven't gotten it yet. And that can help people make that sustained progress that creates change.
So one of the ones that really surprised me in terms of inputs and outputs, and even the relevance of the input, is the value affirmation work. Mm-hmm. There's a study that you talk about in your paper on wise psychological interventions about undergraduate women wrote about why their most important values were important to them. How does that help with health and weight loss? It doesn't even seem related. Right.
So one of the insights from work on value affirmation is that we often walk around the world feeling not okay about ourselves. We feel what psychologists call under threat, and that threat can take a variety of forms. It could be a stressful test that's going to come up. It could be a sort of pattern of interactions or relationship with somebody who you're close to that is not a positive one. It could be an experience of identity threat in school. And that sense that you're not okay can lead people to do various sorts of dysfunctional things, like people can, for example, dismiss information about health that could help them. So smokers, for example, who are given information about the health risks of smoking can dismiss that information in a kind of defensive way. Because to accept it would be too threatening to themselves. It would make themselves too at risk. People who drink can also do that with information about the health risks of alcohol. They can defensively dismiss that information and then not act on it. And what affirmation is a tool essentially to make people feel okay. Not better than other people, not necessarily great, but okay with a capital O and a capital K, like really solid. And what it involves is people thinking about a list of values, identifying the values that are most important to them personally, so things like relationships with friends and family or having a good sense of humor, and then writing for a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, about why and how those values are important to them and times that they've mattered to them. And when people are otherwise experiencing threat, being able to reflect on values brings people back to all of those different aspects of themselves that make them feel like a decent and good and competent and moral human being. And then when things happen, when things seem threatening or fearful, they can respond to those in more productive, proactive ways. So for people who are overweight, for example, it can help people to engage with weight loss and exercise and eating healthy in more balanced ways that are less are more rational and less threatened, and thus it can increase weight loss.
So that seems like it's something that everyone could sort of self-administer pretty inexpensively and easily at any time, to say, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write about my values, or I don't know if thinking about it is as good or nearly as good. But it seems like if my problem is I get hijacked by these urges when I don't feel good about myself, then it seems like this is a good mental exercise to do every so often.
Yeah, I think people have different ways to handle stress and to handle themselves and the challenges that they face in their lives, and this can be a good one for people. I think it is helpful to actually write it rather than to just think it. I think it's helpful to sit down with a piece of paper and identify some values that are important to you and write about why they're important, to sort of bring you back to your truest and broadest sense of who you are, and then to move on from there to take on some of the challenges of the day. It's cousins with things like mindfulness practices, which can also be helpful.
So I first came across your work in a book by Kelly McGonigal, The Upside of Stress. And there she was talking about, I think, like a 3-step process, whereby the third step was to teach someone else or to share your story. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, I think often one of the things that happens when we talk about interventions is we think of the people who we're intervening upon as kind of passive and weak recipients. That language sort of lends itself to that representation. And yet the recipients of interventions are all of us all the time, and we're all the time struggling to deal with the challenges of everyday life. And so one of the most powerful ways to convey ideas that can get people to really understand an idea and connect it to their lives, and then to use it for their own good, is to give people stories and information that captures something important, like for example, the idea that intelligence can grow, or the idea that people can worry at first about whether they belong in college, and it gets better with time, and then to ask people to tell their own version of that story. How has that idea been true for them, or mattered for them, or played out in their own lives? And then people can connect the abstract idea, or the idea that other people have described, the story, the interpretation, to their own experiences in a way that can really come home for them.
So they're constructing the meaning of that for themselves.
Yeah, so it's like often one point is that often people don't take time out to think directly about these things, like how do they think about intelligence, or how do they think about stress, or how do they think about the possibility that groups could change or groups couldn't change. So one thing that the intervention does is it gives people a time out to think directly about something that matters, and then a second thing that it does is it gives them the structure with which to think about that. Here's a useful way to think about this, and here's how other people have sort of thought about this. And then a third thing is that it asks people to fill that structure in with the kind of life and color of their own personal experience, their own personal circumstance. How is that true for them, or how has that been true for them? And that way people are taking a really active role in the process. They're not passive beneficiaries. And often what they're doing in that writing task is they're articulating this idea for other people who might be younger than them or less experienced than them. So they're actually taking the role of interveners, not intervention recipients. And that's empowering.
Gotcha. So How do we design wise interventions in our own lives? Not necessarily in a research setting, but if we want to change ourselves, or if we want to help someone else make a shift that they've told us they want to make, what are the questions we ask? Because my gut reaction is just to sort of copy what you've done and just apply it, whether it fits or not. But I know that's not the right way to do it.
I think right. I mean, I think that I think that there's two things that are true, which have to be thought about together. One is that the kinds of psychological processes that interventions have addressed to improve outcomes are often ones that are broadly important across different people, different school contexts, different personal contexts. At the same time, the form that they take and the particular way that people think about them can vary in different settings. And so you have to have expertise both in that psychological process, and you have to have some expertise in the particular circumstance that you're working in, the setting that you're working in, to really intervene effectively.
So that's what you mean by wise. It's not just from on high, but it's relational.
Yeah, I think that what happens is that there are ideas that exist in the world. Those ideas are often, an idea like, for example, maybe some people are good at math and some people aren't good at math. And that's an idea that's reflected in society and in institutions in society, in something like a gifted and talented program, or in corporations that talk about talent, or in interpersonal experiences, like when people say, "Oh, you're so good at math." And then that idea that exists in society, it comes into a particular form in a particular context, and it gets into people's heads in the form of, for example, the belief that maybe some people are smart at math and maybe other people aren't smart at math. And what you want to do is you want to interrupt that cycle, that way in which an idea that ultimately becomes maladaptive for a person, how that comes into them, and then how they use it.
Mm. So any idea that would sort of predict a disempowered or a less empowered future could be a subject for a wise intervention.
Right, and I think it's complicated, right? Because one of the things that leads to mistrust and feelings of non-belonging for people who are in underrepresented or minorities in context is their awareness of the reality of prejudice and discrimination in society, its legacy and its current state. And so when people walk into a setting and they say, "I'm not sure whether I'm going to belong in this environment because people in my group haven't belonged here in the past," that's coming from the social context. And yet that fear that people experience can also lead them to interpret everyday events as meaning that maybe they don't belong and their group doesn't belong in that setting, which ultimately contributes to a disengagement. So you have to think carefully about when and how you intervene upon a process like that.
Right. I was struck when I read Claude Steele's book, Whistling Vivaldi, at how complicated that is. On the one hand, you want to be reality-based and acknowledge that there are, problems and limitations, and that somebody said something to you that may be transgressive in some way, but also the ability to miss all that and just sort of go about your day can be extra empowering, as opposed to like the thought that a lot of African American parents teach their kids that you've got to be twice as good, right? Which can actually cause some of that stereotype type threat you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it is very complicated, and I also think that in the context of that complication, I also think it's useful to think directly about the possibility that contexts can change in positive ways, even contexts that are not ideal or that might be racist in some ways. And one of the ways that they can change is when people in those settings can build the kinds of positive relationships, peer-to-peer relationships, teacher-to-student relationships, mentor-to-mentee relationships that cultivate success for everybody.
Mm. Right. So it's another form of sort of seeing is believing, where you get a counterfactual to your belief, and it's pointed out to you in a structured way.
Yeah, and then you can see those models, and then as you see those models, you can see a representation of who you could become in that environment, and then as you can become that, the situation itself, the social context itself, is changing for the better.
So in a way, is this all kind of an end run around confirmation bias, where if I tell you, no, this is not the reality, that's the reality, that I'm likely to bristle, that this is sort of a way to like vaccinate people or go around their ego immune system?
Yeah, I think it's I think in the context of belonging, it's not. There's definitely sort of confirmation processes, but it's complicated. When people experience what we call belonging uncertainty, they often want to belong in the setting. They really want to belong in the setting, but they are unsure whether they do, and they fear that they might not. And then when bad things happen, just the presence in their mind of that fear can make that bad thing seem like the harbinger of the truth of the fear. So if you're walking around wondering whether people like you can belong, and then you get excluded from an event, it can seem like that means that people like you don't belong. If you didn't have that fear in the first place, you wouldn't draw that conclusion. It's not exactly a confirmation, because it's not like you believe necessarily that you don't belong, but you fear that you might not.
Mm-hmm. So this works best on those more ambiguous beliefs. But I'm also thinking about like the interventions with middle school kids that Professor Dweck performed, where you can change someone's mindset from fixed to growth, which seems like, for a lot of people that I know with fixed mindsets, it's very, everything that they notice is filtered through the desire to prove that the mindset is fixed.
Yeah. Okay, I have to go to a meeting.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I know you sent me another paper to continue this. I love your work. I think it's some of the most beautiful and important stuff, and we will continue this conversation. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you, Howard. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Wow, what an honor to speak to Gregory Walton, whose work is so important and is going to affect so many lives so positively. Did you get any ideas for your own life, things you can do, ways if you're working professionally that you can implement wise interventions? Let me know. You can leave a comment on the webpage for this episode, which is plantyourself.com/267. You can also leave an audio comment using SpeakPipe, which you can find on each webpage right below the description of the episode. All right, so if you find this valuable and you find the other podcast episodes valuable, please do me a favor and leave a review on iTunes. Just take a few minutes. It's completely free, and it really helps the show rise in the rankings so that other people discover it. And again, Big Change Program starting up mid-May. Check it out, bigchangeprogram.com, and you can sign up at wellstarthealth.com/program. If you're new to the show, you can catch up on 266 archived episodes over at plantyourself.com. In garden news, we're treading water, waiting for the temperatures to get high enough at night so that we can put out the rest of the tomatoes and some basil and some other summer-loving crops. And in running news, things are doing pretty good. I did a couple of 6-milers in the morning. I ran into my friend Eamon, who runs much faster than me, and he pulled me along and reminded me what I'm capable of, which was a great blessing. And I'm off for 2 weeks now to D.C. and New York City and Baltimore, and so hopefully I'll be doing lots of running in the mornings in those beautiful cities. All right, it's thanks time. Of course, thanks to Will Ridenauer for Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace, and check out willridenauer.com for more of his music. And of course, thanks to all you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. There's a few new names this week. So listen carefully till the end. Here we go. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Mara, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hathaway, Mary Jane Wheeler, Alan Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Barnes, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Victoria Dolan, Ovalia Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Julianne Roland, Stu Dolnick, Sarah Durkis, Ron Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Leanne Peterson, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzik, Jeanette Bedden, Gil, Sarah David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Diaz, Gio, and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Funderburg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linman, Rise with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Stephanie Alden, Arthur Bergner, Nicole Ramsey, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable, Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Ashley Corcoran, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant, Happy Oregon, Sabine Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Coble, Shell Rutledge, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Brian Sheridan, Shannon Hirschman, Kate Rolls, Linda Ayat, Julie Langholm, Hedegaard, Isa Tuzen, Wakani, Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Aviva L., Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikowski, A Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen, Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Kelly, Baker Miracle, Ann, Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, and Joshua Summermeyer for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Mara, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jean Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Barnes, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrews, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, Kara Adams, Tom Franzik, Jeanette Benham, Gil Lassert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizo, Gio, and Carol Argentati, Jody Friesner, with Ann Funderburg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Aviva L., Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harperson, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable, Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Colm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzawak, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikowski, A Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Summermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darmy Kelly, Laurie Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan McCorney, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunn-Marie Hagan, Tracy Gullich, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, Diana, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Param Ganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, and Danielle Roberts for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for today. As always, be well, my friends.